没单力，没单力。啊？
是今天这一场是没有口译，
口译就比较
哦。
我要看到
我哋等我呢個錯誤呢個怪佢呢個錯誤，很多時間佢哋長期
可以啊，当然没问题。
他说他会放出来，对，我6、7月。
喂，嘿，在3楼。3楼。
进贡就是供给的时候，
Good morning, and thank you all for coming. Especially in such a short notice. I didn't send out all the invitations until maybe less than 2 weeks ago. But as you can see from the crowd here, we have many people who are interested in knowing more about how to do eco-friendly agriculture in the world, because traditionally agricultural practices have caused great loss in terms of biodiversity globally. So how to do a more eco-friendly agriculture practice is a big concern to everybody who's interested in biological conservation, biodiversity conservation. So we're very pleased today to have our speaker, Dr. Bea Maas from, what should I say, Vienna now, right?
Vienna.
Yes, Vienna now. Bea has been working in agricultural landscape for quite some years. She did her PhD research in Indonesia, studying the interactions of local people with farming practices, especially in the cacao plantations. And during her research, she told me that she not only did the ecological research, she involved local farmers and local scientists in terms of really understanding the interaction between the environmental or ecological aspect of agriculture with the social and economic aspect as well. So during her study, she found out a lot, not only the local ecology, but she also learned quite a bit from the local farmers, and she tried to train and involves local scientists and students. She has more than 46 assistants, mostly or all of them are from local community. And she also trains students. So she has many good stories to talk about. Academically, she's now a research fellow in the University of Vienna. But she's been recruited, and she will become the associate editor of Biological Conservation early next year. So she's responsible mainly in the aspect of ecosystem services. So her specialty ranges from the general or agricultural ecology to ecosystem services, biodiversity conservation, and to multi-trophic interaction. So she has many good stories, and we talked about it just some time ago, and we almost forgot our seminar. So you can see that we can learn much from her, and we hope after the talk we can still have some time to interact with her. So please welcome Dr. Bea Maas for her.
Okay, thank you very much for the nice introduction and for hosting me so well. So it's actually my last day in Taiwan today. We had one wonderful week, and yeah. So I've been introduced already, and will mainly present outcomes and perspective from my PhD on cacao agroforestry systems in Indonesia, but within a more broad context of wildlife-friendly farming, and this is conservationist dream or approaching reality. So this is actually in strong collaboration with the Agroecology Institute, University of Göttingen in Germany, but also with some international scientists. So just let's see. Landscapes worldwide are facing increasing habitat fragmentation. So we in times of increasing demand for food, fuel, and fiber, we all know that, we face landscape transformation, agricultural intensification, and therefore biotic homogenization and biodiversity loss globally. And many people now are interested to restore biodiversity and ecosystem functions in such landscapes. And depending on the many different local landscape factors, and we face the high complexity of these systems. And so we need landscapes in the future which will be able to both conserve biodiversity but also produce a sufficient amount of food and other products. So we still, although we still strongly relate to these ecosystem services provided in different landscapes. So people talk about wildlife-friendly farming, and which should benefit both the biodiversity and ecosystem services in different landscapes, but still so we see from many different and also recent publications that actually, okay, yes, when you restore a landscape and increase the number of natural resources, the structural diversity, and the different needs, of course you will have positive effects on different species, like, so we have results on positive effects on birds, bees, and plants, and bats, bird abundance from all kind of different systems around the world. But there's still a strong debate and a strong concern if biodiversity-friendly farming will really be able in future to fulfill the needs of human beings worldwide. So there is the question if wildlife-friendly farming and yield can really go hand in hand, and how to balance biodiversity conservation and agricultural production. I just point out some papers I really liked in that context, like from Green et al. He actually started to retake the term from some researcher who mentioned it so the term wildlife-friendly farming was actually first brought up in the scientific community around the 80s, but then was kind of sleeping for 20 years. And in 2005 there was this publication of Green et al. On farming and the fate of wild nature, and this started a huge debate about wildlife-friendly farming and the potential of biodiversity-friendly farming for food production, food security, and especially in tropical landscapes, because tropical landscapes provide a lot of resources for all different countries around the world. And more recent publications, like from my colleague Jan Klapp, showed that it's really possible to combine biodiversity and high yields, which many people don't believe. So you have, for example, here his results that when you combine abundant species richness of rare species in Sulawesi and Indonesia and the yield, you actually don't have a negative effect of biodiversity on the yields. So this was kind of the origin of a lot of questions for biologists. Also, biodiversity-friendly certification schemes endorsed. So this is a kind of a map of this idea. And in context of biodiversity-friendly farming, there's a discussion about should we do land sparing or land sharing in the future to combine biodiversity and production in agricultural landscapes. So we see kind of a gradient of extensification or biodiversity combination here from land sparing, which says basically that we should spare the remaining land for biodiversity and focus on conservation, while we should use agricultural systems more effective and more intensively to release some pressure from existing primary habitats, especially forests. We have some concepts in between, that we do land sharing on smaller scales, but still land sharing concept on different small farms. And we have the concept of land, oh sorry, I said sharing, I mean sparing. And we have the concept of land sharing with biodiversity, so you have a high complex structure in landscapes, so for a lot of scattered trees, shrubs, and different structures, especially in terms of vegetation, therefore resources and animals within a whole landscape. And there's a question if the value for ecosystem services that was often proposed is increasing in the direction of land sparing. which I actually doubt, but we will see that there are just many different examples for this, and it's not that easy to answer this question. So, in connection to this, again, here I cite Powell et al. For that he showed that wildlife-friendly farming benefits rare bees, birds, and plants. And I actually focused on exactly that question in my PhD research, and one of the most important publications related to that was that bats and birds increase the crop yield in tropical agroforestry landscapes. So with this concept in mind, I will talk more specifically about my research. So, still, biodiversity and yield, can we combine them? And we show in theoretical concepts of biodiversity versus agricultural intensification and yield. We have here some theoretical range of intensification conservation trade-offs. But we have a lot of open, still unanswered, widely unanswered questions like how to achieve a productive environment in these landscapes while conserving biodiversity, how to account really for the real world complexity. This is a very important question. So we have the theoretical underpinning and the ecological knowledge related to biodiversity or land sparing, land sharing, but it's a kind of a challenge to put this into real world applications and management. And how important is biodiversity actually for agricultural production? A little bit more complex is this graph, where you also have the possibility to have some, so this is also assuming that you can have a sudden discontinuous change between biodiversity and the threshold values of land intensification. And this is both from the publication Co et al. For design the landscapes of sustainable biofuels. So he's showing, for example, then we have something like, this is about oil palm plantations. And if you provide agroforestry zones between the different areas, he's suggesting that we can increase the value for biodiversity even in such large area agricultural production systems such as oil palm. More concretely to my research on biodiversity in cacao agroforestry in Sulawesi, which is in central Sulawesi, which is in Indonesia. So we see the world map here, and Indonesia is a large archipelago with more than 17,000 islands. And actually Sulawesi, which you see here, is one of the 4 big Sunda islands. And in the center of Sulawesi, you find the Lower Lindo National Park. And I worked on the eastern border of that national park. So here you see a picture of the area where I was working. You have the national park border here with primary and secondary forest, and then you have this open land area where you have a mosaic of different land use systems, settlement, different farms. So this is a very important vegetable production area, but actually it's totally dominated by cacao. So 75% in the meanwhile are now cacao plantations, which is interesting because cacao was introduced to the area only 20 years ago. And so it's an example for many tropical areas where you have a very fast production development. So the companies go for fast production and high yields in a short time, which is actually always has been always a curve like that. So you have the high production, and then suddenly, because of some pests or too many pesticides in the environment, the development goes down very quickly. So this is actually, and of course Sulawesi is a biodiversity hotspot. It's also ecologically outstanding because we have high endemism in this area. So we, only for such a big tropical island, we have 280 resident bird species, but a third of them is endemic. 30% of the species are endemic, and this translates quite well to many other taxa, although actually you still find a lot of new species still on that island. So regularly, almost every year we got reports from new species from Sulawesi, Kalimantan, so it's a highly exciting area. And on the other side, it's the 3rd largest producer of cacao in the world. And exactly this contrast between ecological and economical importance, it's a perfect study area for ecosystem services. Yeah, so I mentioned that. You see a schematic map of the area where you see the Lower Lindo National Park forest area indicated here in green, and the lighter area is this open landscape with different agricultural systems, and you see the 4 small villages. I was actually living here in Vuasa. Between 2008 and 2014, actually, I just came back last year, so I was living 7 years in that area and working on different research projects from my diploma until my PhD and beyond. And also, so you have a strong development in this area. Vuasa started with 200 citizens when I started, and now it's more than 2,000. And actually, this is could be more even, I think. So, in this area, and you have a strong pressure on the primary forest here. So, you see, this was the map in 2004, and I measured the forest margin every year, and this dashed line represents actually the forest margin 2010. Now it's actually, some parts of the forest are actually not on the picture anymore. So this is also something very serious to consider. And here I choose 15 cacao plantations for my research, because cacao is, I did mention, really short, it's an agroforestry system, means that cacao is a native forest plant. It comes from the understory in the Amazon region, and it's actually an understory forestry. So it's strongly related to shade. And if you want to plant cacao, you need shade trees in the beginning. So if you imagine a cacao plantation, you don't have and compare maybe to, I know, a cornfield or something, you see on the first sight it is something really different in terms of biodiversity. You have all these different shade layers, and you have a lot of potential to put in different plant species, different densities and diversity of different species. So it's very exciting to study the potential design for biodiversity and both farmer profits. So we put this design here, we selected 15 different cacao plantations. They had to fulfill a lot of criteria, so without pesticide management, good accessibility, and so on, and they all had to fit into our dual landscape local design. So every plantation, when you look here, is differing in distance to forest. So we have some plantations from 0 meter to forest, and the maximum was 3,000 meter. We have a smooth gradient. And also shade is different. We have shade from 0% to so low shade, medium shade, and high shade. Between 0 and 75%. So, and in every of these cacao plantations, we installed an exclosure experiment of birds and bats. This was a really exciting work. Because you come to that area where actually nobody has seen a scientist before, and you meet all these farmers, and you have selected your 15 plantations now, so this is the time where already everybody realized you are in that area, and everybody's interested what you want to do. And then you go back to the city after you talk to a few of your assistants, and you buy like 5,000, no, 5,000 is much, 5 kilometers of fishing nets and a few trucks full of bamboo. And then you come back to the farmers and you tell them that you actually, or you have told before, you tell them that you actually intend to put boxes around their cacao trees for at least 2 years. And finally we did it for 4 years. This is quite something, also because the farmers give something of their existence to us. So some of them only own 100 cacao trees, and in the beginning they gave 16 to me. So what I did for my, so later we doubled that. But for my own PhD research, so we had 60 different of these cages in the 15 plantations, so 4 different treatments per site, means 8 different trees per site. And in every of these cages we manipulated the access of birds and bats. So we have a cage here with a fishing net, which we can open and close like a curtain. And so we excluded birds, for example, by closing the cage in the very early morning and opening it in the afternoon, so bats can be inside this cage. And I have to say that the fisher net, the mesh size, is small enough that birds and bats cannot access, but still large insects, even like dragonflies, large beetles and so on, did not change through the net. So we excluded, in one cage on every plantation, we excluded birds, we excluded bats. We had cages that were always closed and excluded both birds and bats, and one control to compare this manipulation. And on all these 120 cacao trees, we collected continuous data for 2 years. So I actually almost never leave the study area, and also not my assistants. So every tree was, for 2 years, we collected data on the daytime and the nighttime arthropod community, so insects and spiders. We collected data on the whole cacao development, so starting from counting the cacao flowers, counting the number of medium fruit, we harvested the fruit ourselves, we dried them, and finally determined the final marketable yield of cacao, which is the dry bean. And this is the thing the farmer sells on the market. We investigated, of course, the common cacao pests and leaf herbivory, and then we did different side experiments, just to mention one on avian predation success in cacao. And we wanted to ask, with this experiment, do insectivorous birds and bats contribute to crop yield? Especially we wanted to combine this with bats, because bats are strongly underrepresented in this field of research. And a publication of Kalka et al. In 2008 in Science showed actually that bats are strongly underestimated in their importance. We wanted to know what drives this actual pest limitation in cacao agroforestry, and how can biodiversity function be managed finally. To do this, especially for the last question, we strongly collaborated with all the cacao farmers in the area from the very beginning, very closely, so we had monthly meetings and they all gave feedback to our research. There was continuous communication with farmers, which was really important. To come to results, yes, we found effects on cacao yield. We found tremendous effects on cacao yield actually by birds and bats. So what you see here is a comparison of the different manipulations, so the day exclosure, which means bird exclosure, night exclosure, which means bat exclosure, and the full exclosure of both birds and bats. And you see the three different manipulations. So you see here in gray all the original values for single plantations, and here you see the mean values and the 95% confidence intervals. Everything related, the zero level represents the control. So advantage here compared even also to box plots is that you directly see if an effect is significant or not. Namely when this confidence interval is not touching the zero level, we have a significant effect. And although this seems here like a small gap, it's a huge effect. Highly significant on the one hand. On the other hand, this means that when in the absence of birds and bats, 30% of the cacao yield will be lost on every hectare and every year. This is quite something. And when we translate this to the current ICCO, so the cacao, international cacao value, we see that birds and bats together contribute to $730 per every hectare in every year in cacao. And especially in a country, a low-income country like Indonesia, this is a very important effect. We did not, so this is the effect here for the final yield, right? I told you that we have, this is the effect on the final dry beans. And you can imagine that if you lose some effects, this is not so easy to measure effects on this small amount of dry beans you get every month. But we have an even much stronger effects on the flowers, fruit, and the quality. So we have effects already beginning from the stage of the flowers in every development stage of cacao. This is, but of course, this result is the most interesting because it concerns the final marketable yield. And we have all these effects across the local and landscape gradients. So why actually is cacao yield related to bird and bats, to insectivorous birds and bats? And that's because amongst others probably, but most importantly, effects on different arthropod groups. So we observed in the 2 years almost 47,000 individuals and 16 orders, 65 families of arthropods. And we could put more than 7 orders from 46 families into analyzers. So don't be shocked, you just should see the pattern here. So we have the 0 level representing the control, and we have the 3 different manipulations. And here you see you don't have an increase and decrease compared to the 0 level, you have an increase. So while all the yield decreased, of course all the arthropods increased, like Lepidoptera larvae, Coleoptera, so beetles, ants, spiders, aphids, night-active insects like Orthoptera and Platodea. This is actually interesting because we do not only cover the 2 insect groups which occur in the most abundant ones, like Coleoptera and Lepidoptera larvae, but because of this long-term study, we also cover underrepresented arthropod groups. And we split the results for insects occurring on the foliage and insects occurring on stem and branches, because there's a difference if you want to manage a damaged foliage of a cacao tree or damaged crops. And what we see here, that you have here significant results, that different groups are affected significantly throughout, either by birds, like of course the day active insects are more significantly controlled by birds, while the more night active groups like Orthoptera and Platodea are affected by the bats. And this is also interesting because we have results on different groups, like on the one hand on the herbivores, I said that, on the beetles and Lepidoptera larvae, but on the other hand on the predatory arthropods like ants and spiders. And they control other insects as well. So what we have here is also complex multi-trophic interactions which are affected. And we think 2 things. On the one hand, with the right management of bird and bat function in cacao, you could maybe even enhance this positive results on yield. And with the additional management of other groups such as ants and spiders and a better understanding of them, you could further enhance such results. So we're still in the beginning of understanding how much we can really about the benefits of biodiversity, which are huge. So how to manage predation services was a really important question for us, and so I mentioned that it's difficult because you have to take into account complex trophic interaction, different environmental factors, and also the results or a good management you might find for one plantation, one area, might not be the best management for another plantation in another area. And we have to mind the knowledge gaps which still exist. I mentioned we still don't know much about underrepresented species groups, for example. So we wanted to answer these questions. I chose 2 examples for such studies. Concerning local management and the management of shade trees, there is a very nice publication of Jan Klav et al., also from this paper combining high biodiversity with high yields. And he shows a threshold yield versus shade tree cover, and he is suggesting, he's concluding that about a shade cover between 30 and 40% is actually not the optimum between yield and biodiversity in a farm. So this is a very practical result for farmers when they can know, like, okay, 30-40%, and this is scientifically proven. If you manage to build the trust that the farmers really believe in your scientific results, but it's a different question. And yeah, I mentioned this, that species richness of rare species is actually not related to a loss of yield in agroforestry systems. So actually you have something, you can achieve something like an optimum level here of high biodiversity and high yield is possible. Another example is from our site study on the avian predation success. So we wanted to find out, okay, well, we have this different, we did mist netting of birds and point counts, and so we know that we have in the cacao plantations about 60 bird species. And about from 60 bird species in total, we have 50 insect-eating bird species in the cacao plantations. And then we wanted to know which one is actually the key provider of services. So we performed a dummy experiment, which I can strongly recommend. It's a lot of fun to do this. You work with plasticine, and you put it on different parts of the cacao tree to get information about the gleaning species. We actually also wanted to test for rodents and bats, but they're definitely too intelligent for this method. But it works very well with birds. So I don't know if you can see this here. It's hard on the picture, but birds actually go here, and it's glued. And so you can really quantify predation marks on these dummies. It's an unmistakable shape. So we can combine this quantification of bird predation marks with our mist netting and point count data, and put into different models and ISC model selection. And we finally found out, after testing all the different species in all combinations and doing one by one dropping of different factors, no matter what we tested, let's put it like that, we found that only the most common species, the lemon-bellied white-eye, or Zosteros chloris, is driving all the predation success here. Like one has to say on artificial dummies of larvae, but larvae are also the most important pest in cacao. So that's a nice result. And again, it's a nice result for farmers, because it's a good recommendation to tell the farmer, yeah, focus or mainly focus on this most common species. You can put nesting boxes, you can plant different shade trees to provide nesting resources, and then you have this loyal 24-hour working buddy in your plantation. So this was published in Applied Ecology. And yeah, in addition, we see that this bird, and in general species abundance, and also the sum of the predation success, or here the sum of the bird marks, is related to the distance of forest. So closer to forest, we had a higher species abundance and also higher success of predation, which means both common species, but also the vicinity to forest margin is important for the service. How is this relevant for farmers? So we need really practical management approaches, things the farmers can really realize in their plantations. And this may also depend on the country and the area we're working on. But for us in Sulawesi, yeah, here was a paper by my PhD supervisor, Tia Chanke, published this year in Conservation, that is about conserving biodiversity through certification of tropical agroforestry crops. But it's not only about certification. It's about concrete implications for local management. So I mentioned the results on shade, which is very practicable. It's about management of key species and functions, such as the common lemon-bellied white-eye. And it's very important, and this is sometimes overseen or underestimated. It's about transparency and communication of research results, not only to the scientific community, but also to local communities. And I recommend every researcher not to underestimate the knowledge of local communities in their research. This is a very nice paper I also wanted to present. It's from Chapman et al. From this year, and it's about the name of the paper is Being Relevant and Implications for Early Career Scientists in Conservation, something like that. And it's a very nice table he puts here. Strategies and take-home management, how to be relevant for conservation. So I just show you that, and you might read it later. It's take off blinders, so maximize the conservation impact by knowing appropriate scale of project. So I just can't say it any better, so that's why I put it here. And that you have to be creative and committed in these things. Very motivating paper. Come back to our basic question, approaching reality or not. So finally I want to show some examples. I mentioned Pivot et al. So it's possible. Wildlife farming is possible and already happening in, all over the world. It's still in the beginning, and we still have to understand a lot. But for example, here he did a study on very important crops such as beans, and wheat fields, and they only took 3 or 8% of large farms on the very edge, and they only diversified the edges of large-scale farms, wheat and bean farms. And what they found, on the one hand, very positive effects of pollinators. So you have here the intensive farm. Nothing has changed. You have here a farm where 3% of the edge are diversified, and here you have the result for where 8% of the edge are diversified. And of course, where you have a higher diversification of, so more plants here on the border, you have more pollinators and you have more predators. But you also have positive effects on yields in oilseed rape, beans and wheat. So this is quite nice. So you have here the rest of the field, and here you have the edge. And actually in some few fields you even had a better yield result than in the intensive farm. And what is good, what is interesting, he finds that you never have any negative effect in yield because of biodiversity. So yeah, good example for approaching reality. And the other one, Lentini et al. On bats, where he shows in Australia that remaining remnants and unimproved pastures improve the activity and the abundance of bats in agricultural landscapes. There's so many other results already, but still so much space for improvement. We're also interested in global patterns. This is really something I want to focus with my upcoming projects on. So we collaborated data, and so far there are just very few studies that provide conclusions on a global scale. It's also because we have so few studies on that. One was published also this year in Biological Reviews on the global effect of birds and bats in tropical agroforestry systems. Just also very short, but you see here the results, the global distribution of different feeding guilds of birds, the larger pies, and bats, the smaller pies. And one pattern we see that the most important group globally are the invertebrate feeders, so the ones eat on insects, feed on insects, and especially in the species-rich tropical regions. And so in conclusion, we found here, we compared 32 different studies on bird and bat exclosures and their effect on different arthropod groups, on ants, on herbivores, on predatory species. And we find that worldwide birds and bats play a critical role for arthropod predation. And we found, contrasting to the general opinion that there's a difference between boreal, temporal, tropical regions, actually they have very similar effect size. And this trophic cascade strength depends on multi-trophic interaction, resourceability, and trade. So again, it's quite complex, but we get more and more answers. So is there hope for wildlife-friendly farming and landscapes in the tropics? Please mind the gap. So we still need more research on the effects of primary productivity, herbivore density, community structures, multi-trophic interaction. We need more data about the importance, for example, of roosting and nesting resources of birds. And we need more results on underrepresented species groups, especially still much more data on bats, on ants, and on large, not so easy and fast to detect arthropods such as Orthoptera. So this is a weird animation, but Bamford et al., for example, asked 5 big questions concerning future research on biodiversity and ecosystem functions in agricultural systems. So we have to ask which crops and livestock we want to study, about the environmental performance of new farming methods, suitable methods to improve those approaches and techniques, and where is low yield and high yield farming suitable, and which scale is the future demand for which service, which crop, which interaction. So, and I will close with some conclusions I personally have from my personal impression from comparing all these different studies and working in that field. So I think it depends really on the region where you're working. If you look at oil palm plantations in Malaysia, like here, close to rainforests, I think also cooperating with the companies here to improve landscape sharing is something you should not try. So this is definitely something for land sparing, and where we should really focus on land sparing and focus on using these ecologically quite sad landscapes as effective as possible to release the remaining rainforest area. I found this impressive picture. It's in Hefei, central China. It's quite interesting. We have this highly, this big city environment and these fisher farms, and nearby you have something that looks like a lot of potential for smallholder and for land sharing. Actually, you see the trees and the scattered structures, and you could actually. You see one side a lot of, in the remaining natural landscape, you see a lot of potential for biodiversity-friendly approaches. And of course, in landscapes which are traditionally mosaic landscapes and smallholder landscapes, should be conserved because they are highly important for biodiversity, and they're also highly important in cultural meanings. So if I imagine that some big company is replacing these little villages I was working on in Indonesia, where you have farmers, but you have handcrafters, and you have different languages, and you have medical experts in medical plants, and so much knowledge. And not only biodiversity, all that, so many things would be lost with large-scale farming on these areas. So it really depends on the area. And these smallholder farmings, there is a lot of space for improvement, and also for yield improvement, which will finally probably also convince the critical politicians and economists, and hopefully, I hope that. So to conclude, biodiversity indeed provides strong benefits to human well-being. High yield and biodiversity can be combined, and shown by many different examples. Of course, there are differences between agricultural systems which always have to be taken into account when we think of future management. So transferability is something highly critical in my opinion, and local landscape scales have to be considered. So landscape complexity is always very important, and for this research is recommended not only to have conclusions from a plot scale, but from a landscape scale. And we should mind the complexity and the knowledge gaps in this context. And so I want to acknowledge, of course, we never had a picture, everybody on the picture, but this research would have never been possible without this huge team of highly committed assistants. I'm very thankful for that, and of course for different funding agencies, input from different universities, research institutions, and finally, thank you so much for your attention, especially for hosting me, for that very nice time in Taiwan last week. This is a picture from this morning, 6 o'clock at the research station. Renofos, yeah, and saw some very nice butterflies, and had such a nice time, such nice discussion. So I'm looking forward to your questions, and thank you very much.
So, any questions, comments, or experience to share?
Thanks for a nice. And my question is, does there, in the local plantation, does the farmers have something unfriendly to the wildlife? Like, do they try to remove any animals by insecticide or herbicide or something?
Yeah.
Or sunshine?
Yeah. Thank you for the questions. Sadly, it's a strongly increasing trend to use pesticides. And it's largely not really reflected in terms of biodiversity, because I think we have to understand that those people really grow up in a highly diverse species-rich environment. But they have things like TVs, and they see economically developed other areas, and of course this is something they wish for and they want to develop. So things like pesticides that come to the area are seen as something highly positive and as a technical improvement. So you really need the education to tell the people about the negative effects of pesticides. And we started that, and so this made a lot of change of many farms in the cacao. When I told the farmers what pesticides actually do with groundwater and with the soil and how they affect sustainability and the lifetime expectation of cacao plantations, they were really concerned. Other things is that they traditionally also earn money, of course, from hunting. Bird markets and bird hunting, bird trading is a huge conservation issue in Indonesia. But yeah, all is basically related to lack of awareness and education by training, and also lack of alternatives, and especially maybe lack of support by government, because local communities could be encouraged to put more efforts into ecotourism development of their areas instead of earning money by hunting and logging activities. So this is of course what's going on. But many people are highly concerned. Many people are highly concerned about their biodiversity too. So yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Did they start with some kind of community effort to deal with the situation?
Yeah.
Telling more people not to use this?
Yeah. So what we did in that whole area, so we have 4 villages on the map. Actually now there's a 5th one. So we had 5 villages, and I encouraged the people, I told them